Monday 218, routing and switching. We had skills evaluation and theory, submit the materials. So we'll take a look at, in fact, just a second, we'll take, this would be, we're covering week 5 and 6. Weeks 5 and 6 here, so one day, well, on the 19th, we didn't have anything. So, really, 3 class sessions to cover. This is a picture of the network we had up on the board. It might have varied. It might vary a little bit from what we did. And these were the IP addresses assigned, and each student configured their router for RIP, and then the connection out to the internet. Wednesday, more about IP addressing, switching topics, and a review. So we talked a lot about the data link layer and MAC addresses, physical layer, for example, RJ45. 8 wires, 1, 2, 3, and 6. Transmit and receive. You know, we can have half duplex, where we're either just sending or we're receiving, one or the other. Or we can have full duplex, send and receive. Notice we're working here at the MAC layer, MAC addresses. More on that later on. Alright. Talked about how to clear the switch. VLAN DAT, delete that, do an erase startup config, and then you reload. Alright. Get a PC, MAC addresses, and we're talking about a bad PC. We reviewed ARP, address resolution protocol. A PC does an ARP. In fact, here, let me do this. PC does an ARP. For example, it has an IP address. Okay, does an ARP. It needs to go to an IP address. Does an ARP, and then it gets the matchup for the IP and the MAC address in an ARP table. Now it can use that MAC address to get out of the network in order to get to a router to do some switching. Okay. We talked about a buffer in a switch, cyclic redundancy check, and we went through, you know, cut through, store and forward, and so forth, how a switch manages connections based on MAC addresses. Here's that same network, and we talked about some of the key things. Default gateway, we put that addressing on the VLAN 1. We put an address for management, gave it a default gateway. If we have a switch and we need to access that switch from a PC, let's say, that's sitting over here. Okay, everybody with me here? So if this PC needs to access this switch using the management IP in there, we have to have a default gateway to be able to get back out. That makes sense? If you have a PC on the switch, then it's not important. Well, it's not actually used, it's still important. Alright. Let's keep. So, Wednesday the 21st, the 19th, I believe that was a snow day, a day we didn't have classes. Make sure, old news now, but financial aid and scholarships, IP addressing, switching basics, make sure we're okay configuring IP6. So we talked about collision domains and broadcast. Alright, so we talked about collision domains and broadcast domains. For example, we talked about an ARP earlier. ARPs will cover an entire broadcast domain. A collision domain, just an example, we used to have hubs, and initially in hubs, PC would try to send, let's say this PC was trying to get to this server, okay, if nobody else was using the hub, well then it would send. If somebody else was using it, it'd have to wait. Carrier sense, multi-access, collision domain. Okay, so that's what it did. If two devices tried to access the hub at the same time, they'd see a collision, they'd both back off a random amount of time and try again. In Wi-Fi, it's carrier sense, multi-access, collision avoidance, where they take turns. Alright. So, collision domains, broadcast domains. We talked about the switch, having a buffer, cyclic redundancy check. If it's storing forward, if the frame was damaged, then it's dropped. We dropped the frame. Already went over the hub scenario. Okay, here's an example from our running lab that we were using. Okay, we talked about if we put an AP on there, Wi-Fi, device connecting, that would be collision avoidance. Switches though now, you don't have as many issues with collision domains because they buffer the information. They can buffer and store it and then send it out the ports, or if it's cut through, it sends them out right away. Okay, now for a router, these would all be collision domains. Router does not, well, they're all broadcast domains, excuse me. All broadcast domains, because a router does not forward a broadcast. So, if you're not doing VLANs, this whole thing would be a broadcast domain. This would be a broadcast domain. The only way you would ever have collisions, well, you really don't if you're running full duplex. These were some passwords for the lab that we were using at the time. This was an adjustment we made on the lab when we were doing IP6. So this lab originally we had it set up for IP4, and then we used it to actually do some IP version 6 on the lab. We talked about these layers. So you could think of this as a core layer, the distribution between the routers. We have a distribution and access layer. Access layer is where devices are getting access in. And that's it for these weeks.